Well, I'm delighted to be here, and as you know, I'm a cultural anthropologist. I'm also, however, a Confucianist, which is not to be confused with being a Confucianist. A Confucianist who believes that the knowable world is incomplete if seen from any one point of view, incoherent if seen from all points of view at once, and empty if seen from the famous nowhere in particular perspective, that is from a dehumanizing distance where everything looks the same. So the choice in life, if you're a Confucianist in both scholarship and life, is between incompleteness, incoherence, and emptiness. And given that choice, I never can opt for incoherence. Emptiness does seem like it's a dehumanizing distance to me, so my only option is incompleteness. I try to then stay on the move between different points of view, always looking for the other side of the story. If you want a metaphor, I suppose the metaphor would be some kind of Wittgensteinian metaphor of sitting on a branch and starting to saw off the branch you're sitting on. But since I'm an affirmative postmodernist, not a skeptical one, I like to see what I can see from that branch before I saw it off. The activity is not simply one of deconstructing, but of being constructive, seeing what you can see before you saw that branch, fall to the next one, see what you can see there, start the sawing process. And I have confidence that that there is no ultimate ground you're going to hit. It's going to be a kind of eternal free fall, and you try to remember what you learned from each of those branches. So that's how I approach things. Tonight I want to address one of the most fundamental questions in the study of morality and religious ethics, namely this one. Why do the many peoples of the world disagree with each other in their concrete moral judgments? And why don't those judgments possess the universality that is characteristic of the idea of truth? And when I mean concrete moral judgments where disagreements occur, I mean over such basic existential issues as what's male and what's female, how should burdens and benefits be distributed, what is a dignified or good way of life and what isn't, questions of these sorts. Okay. It's certainly a question that's been on my mind for many decades. I believe the answer one gives to that question has many implications for the way individuals and societies react to cultural differences, and for whether one becomes a Confucianist at all. I suppose my interest in this question goes back to my childhood. I have a distinct memory from the very early days of television in the United States in the early 1950s. I was probably about 8 years old when the following experience took place, and this may be one of several reasons I became a cultural anthropologist, but in any case, I have a memory of a public service advertisement on television, an animated representation of historical American patriots, which had the following lyrics. I won't try to sing it, but it was a jingle on television with cartoon figures and so forth, and it went, George Washington loved good roast beef. Haym Salomon loved fish. When Uncle Sam served liberty, they both enjoyed the dish. Who was Haym Salomon? Well, I'll tell you that in a moment. And I've long wondered precisely how far one could credibly extend that very subjectivist and extremely relativistic, taste-based or opinion-based notion of habits and social norms. What if George Washington loved polygamy and Haym Salomon loved monogamy? What if the topic was attitudes towards male circumcision, which Haym Salomon, a Jewish banker and friend of George Washington who helped finance the American Revolution, might well have endorsed on Old Testament grounds, the covenant between Abraham and God, that go well beyond personal taste and collective opinion? While it's highly likely that George Washington was not circumcised, perhaps on different religious grounds in which the Old Testament was seen as old and no longer binding. Much more recently, my interest in the question why is there so much disagreement in concrete moral judgments across and even within cultural groups, was piqued when I read a short note from another American president, in this case Thomas Jefferson, written to another Jewish American in 1820, when there were rather few Jews living in the United States. In the summer of 1820, the second only Jewish synagogue in the United States was consecrated in Savannah, Georgia, and Rabbi Jacob de la Mato posted his sermon to two former presidents of the United States, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. On September 1st, 1820, Thomas Jefferson wrote back to the Jewish rabbi as follows, quote, Thomas Jefferson returns his thanks to Dr. de la Mato, de la Mato was his name, for the eloquent discourses on the consecration of the synagogue of Savannah, which he has been so kind as to send him. It excites in him the gratifying reflection that his own country has been the first to prove to the world two truths, the most salutary to human society, that man can govern himself, in other words, the rejection of the idea of the divine right of kings, and that religious freedom is the most effectual anodyne against religious dissension. The maxim of civil government being reversed in that of religion, and this is Thomas Jefferson, where its true form is divided we stand, united we fall. Divided we stand, united we fall, by which I take Thomas Jefferson to mean the following. Forcing different things to be alike or uniform with respect to metaphysical beliefs, including those beliefs made manifest in religious and cultural practice, is a form of tyranny and provokes resentment, resistance, and conflict, because metaphysical belief-grounded cultural and religious diversity is somehow inherent in the human condition and is a condition of human flourishing. Now here's something approaching the very opposite sentiment, expressed by a very educated, highly enlightened Italian physician in the late 19th century, and quoted in an essay by my former colleague Sander Gilman. This is what the enlightened Italian physician in the 19th century says. Quote, I shout and shall continue to shout at the Hebrews until my last breath. Cease mutilating yourselves. Cease imprinting upon your flesh an odious brand to distinguish you from other men. Until you do this, you cannot pretend to be our equal. As it is, you of your own accord, with the branding iron from the first days of your lives, proceed to proclaim yourself a race apart, one that cannot and does not care to mix with ours. So, that's the end of the quote. So there has been a lot of shouting going on in the world in the last few years, some of it with direct implication for the Hebrews and for many others as well. For example, the 2010 press release and report by the Dutch Medical Association decrying neonatal male circumcision and calling on Jews and Muslims of Holland to abandon it. And of course, you may be familiar with the recent attempt at a ballot initiative in San Francisco, which got a lot of attention in the last several months, prohibiting the male circumcision procedure in the city of San Francisco and making it a crime. That has been stopped for the moment because of a judgment by a judge, but nevertheless, there was that attempt at a ballot initiative and direct democracy vote in San Francisco to criminalize male circumcision. And the historically ethno-national states of Northern Europe, as you probably know, are in such a state of panic these days over cultural migration and the cultural diversification of their societies, that the home-based ceremonial bris performed for my own grandson by a well-known mohel in Washington, D.C., would apparently now be illegal in Sweden, where it has been prohibited by law. Some of the shouting is aimed at other minority groups, for example, the burqa bans of France and Belgium, You're probably familiar with the headscarf controversy in France, which has gone on for several years, in which the state now prohibits the wearing of headscarves in their publics, in the School of the Republic. And just to be consistent, they decided to extend the ban to yarmulkes for Jews, and wearing of large crosses is also now prohibited in the schools, in the public schools in France. And only 18 months ago or so, a kind of moral panic was set off in the United States when the American Academy of Pediatrics issued a report in which they wrote the following paragraph, quote, "Some physicians, including pediatricians who work closely with immigrant populations in which FGC, female genital cutting, is the norm, have voiced concern about the adverse effects of criminalization of the practice on educational efforts. These physicians emphasize the significance of the ceremonial ritual in the initiation of the girl or the adolescent as a community member and advocate nicking or incising the clitoral hood," end quote. This is a procedure that was recommended by the American, or floated by the American Pediatrics Association, that's even more minor than a neonatal male circumcision as routinely performed in the United States, and would be done hygienically and with zero health consequences. Nevertheless, it set off a panic, a flood of expressions of indignation at this rather modest attempt at cultural sensitivity then appeared in the media. Quote, "Why are American doctors mutilating girls?" Ayan Hershey Ali asked in a widely distributed opinion piece. "Why are they supporting a practice designed to control female sexuality?" Predictably, she easily succeeded at inciting the readers of the Daily Beast, which is where this op-ed piece appeared. Most of those readers, of course, think this issue is a no-brainer, who feeling disgusted and aroused, sent in online commentaries denouncing savage Africans, barbaric men, ignorant doctors, and also, of course, Islam. Well, all this is a kind of challenge for a cultural anthropologist such as myself, who believes in the importance of accuracy in the representation of little-known others, who believes in the importance of prizing facts over factoids. By a factoid, I mean things that look like facts and are presented in the media as facts, but in fact are not facts. I believe as well that one of the major aims of anthropology is to give a kind of permission to others to be different, and to critically ask if it's possible to do that even with a provocative and emotion-laden topic such as this one, to see whether one can take a small step towards humanizing others rather than turning them into perceived barbarians. So I decided to call this lecture Engaging Cultural Differences Without Moral Panic. The spirit I want to honor in the lecture is that of the famous anthropologist Clifford Geertz, who helped create the School of Social Science at the Institute for Advanced Study. Geertz was a robust cultural pluralist who was for decades the voice of cultural anthropology at the New York Review of Books. We once had Margaret Mead as a public spokesman, and Clifford Geertz couldn't step into those shoes, but he sort of was in a role like that. Towards the end of his life, he wrote as follows, quote, "The image of a world full of people so passionately fond of each other's cultures that they aspire only to celebrate one another does not seem to me a clear and present danger. The image of one full of people happily apotheosizing their heroes and diabolizing their enemies, alas, does." He was famous for his attempt to accurately represent what he called the native point of view. So in a moment, in an attempt to humanize others, I'm going to show a short documentary prepared by an American filmmaker, Sunju Amadou, who, as a youth, returned to Sierra Leone, the ancestral home of her parents, with her female relatives, including her mother and her older sister, to be initiated into the powerful women's society known as Bundo, also known as Sande in some parts of West Africa. That older sister was a postdoctoral fellow of mine for 2 years, and someone who I know quite well. And the whole family went back, essentially, to be initiated. These Bundu West African women's societies are historically fascinating. They've been around for hundreds of years, if not longer. The societies in West Africa, or at least some of them, are organized into male societies and female societies, each of which is quite powerful in its own way. When colonial folks from Europe ended up in West Africa, and when the British were negotiating colonial relationships, they discovered that in these societies, probably 25% of the chiefs of these societies were women. These were very empowered women in these societies, and initiation into it is something that happens. In any case, this will be an opportunity to hear women's voices from a society where women are very powerful, and the ritual initiation of both males and females is routine, and to witness the way this American-educated, first-generation African-American tries to understand the meanings and significance of a way of life that has been central to her ethnic heritage. Then I'm going to go over some scientific evidence on health outcomes comparing initiated and uninitiated women in West Africa, those who've had genital surgeries and those who haven't. That's what the handout's about. And then we'll see if there's any time at all, maybe that we can have a few questions or exchange views. I'm fully aware of some of the hazards of doing what I'm trying to do on this occasion. It's noteworthy that in liberal circles in North America and Europe, even among typically skeptical and normally critical public intellectuals, there has been an easy acceptance of anti-FGM representations of family and social life in Africa as dark, brutal, primitive, barbaric, and unquestionably beyond the pale. Several moral, political, and feminist theorists even suggest that these coming-of-age and gender identity ceremonies of African women deserve a place on the list of absolute evils, along with human sacrifice, the Holocaust, rape, lynching, and slavery. And you will find these kinds of lists out there in the literature. Much of the press in the First World similarly has been swayed. Media coverage that affects American opinion, perhaps your opinions, about African customs have been heavily influenced by anti-FGM activists and advocacy groups who have launched what they call a no-tolerance campaign, who represent the African practice of female genital alteration as a scourge or disease that needs to be eradicated, who presuppose that any deliberate alteration of that part of the female anatomy is an example of the patriarchal oppression of women and must be viewed as a mutilation, and who, even today, are busy lobbying Congress, for example, to make it a crime for an American citizen to do an operation of the sort even outside the United States. Africa is a dark continent where for hundreds, if not thousands of years, African parents have been murdering and maiming their daughters and depriving them of the capacity for a sexual response. That has been the widely publicized, discussed, and horror-evoking claim of anti-FGM advocacy organizations and of much of the press. African parents, by the kinds of accounts that you hear, are either A, monsters, that is, mutilators and tormentors of their children, or B, benighted, that is, dangerously ignorant of and uneducated about the physical and reproductive health consequences of their own child-rearing practices in the best interests of their children, or C, prisoners of an evil, barbaric tradition that they themselves would like to escape if only they could find a way out, or perhaps, this is the fourth alternative given the representations, African mothers are weak and passive and live under the patriarchal thumb of odious and savage African men who find it pleasurable to suppress the sexuality of their own women. Those are the choices. Equally noteworthy, however, is that those judgments seem precipitous and fundamentally misinformed by many anthropologists, most of them women, who study gender initiation and life stages in Africa. Many anthropologists and other researchers who work on these topics have long been aware of discrepancies between the global discourse on female circumcision with its images of maiming, murder, sexual dysfunction, mutilation, coercion, and oppression, and their own ethnographic experiences with indigenous discourses and with social and physical realities of their field settings and research sites. So what I'm going to do now is turn to this documentary about Bandhu, and then we'll see where we are. When it's over, I'll go over that handout and make a few more comments, and we can have a discussion if there's time, or we can carry on at the reception. Let me see if I can now get this up. Can we get this louder?
And participated in the Bondo celebrations at another ceremony
This is the film
very similar to our own. I was happy to dance with these initiates and give them money just as our mother had done at our ceremony. I can remember that my sister and I underwent certain rituals, but mostly what I remember is us being pampered by our aunties and female cousins who braided our hair and sprayed us with perfume and powder, just like these initiates. I was just as excited for these initiates as my aunties were at our ceremony.
This is my postcard.
Describe to me what was going through your mind or what you were feeling at our ceremony. A very long time ago, but I remember this particular scene and just being completely bewildered and just trying to take it all in, all the people and what was happening to us. I don't really think that I was, processing things in any intellectual way. I was just watching. Were you aware of why you were there and what was going to happen?
Well, I knew what you knew, pretty much, that we were going to join Bondo. Our mother and our grandmother had informed us back in the States that we were going to join the Women's Society Bondo, and I was extremely excited because it's something that I've heard about since I was very young. Our cousins always spoke about it, aunts. So I was really excited about it, and I knew that it was just this great thing, this great thing that we would become a part of. As to what actually was going to take place, no, I didn't have any idea at the time. I had certain questions, and I heard certain rumors, and I had an aunt, another aunt, when we were kids, what they would do, because she told me that she sneaked and saw her elder sister joining in the bush. And so she had mentioned the comments about, being painted in all white and that they cut you somehow. But what they cut and why they cut, I have absolutely no idea, or even whether there was actually any cutting. I didn't really know what initiation was, what it entailed, what was going to happen to us. And I knew much about circumcision or excision, which is what is practiced in Bondo and Sierra Leone. To be frank, no, I didn't have that particular knowledge. Defining Bondo is really, really difficult because it's something that is it's completely unheard of in Western culture and the society that we grew up in the States. It's really only understood within the context of Sierra Leonean culture, and particularly Kono culture. But to try and at least translate the meaning of Bondo in English, I think that there's just three dimensions that are really essential. First, it's the process of initiation, or the transition from girlhood to womanhood that takes place through various rituals or rites that make up the initiation ritual. Secondly, it's the operation itself. women refer to bondo, or circumcision, quote unquote, as bondo. Somebody who has undergone bondo has undergone circumcision. So it's synonymous with the cutting that takes place. And third, a third dimension, which I think is really, really important, is the institution itself, and it's the institutionalization. I refer to it as the institutionalization of women's power. It's very senior women who belong to leading lineages or ruling lineages, who control, organize, and wield tremendous amount of power within Bondo itself. They make up Bondo, and Bondo is also synonymous with this female hierarchy.
According to the World Health Organization, about 100 million women worldwide have undergone female circumcision, most widely practiced on the African continent. Global efforts to bring an end to the practice are increasing, as many campaigners believe that it is a violation of the human rights of women. From the Bondo ceremony I attended upon my return to Sierra Leone, and having myself undergone Bondo, I find that what I associate most with this practice are sentiments of joy and pride. While I was there, I wanted to know from the women who organized and performed these rituals what they thought of my mom bringing us from the West back home all those years ago.
Well, like I talk as so you, like most of them things, they want me to celebrate because of when we all come together. We all come together. Mama side don't come together. Papa side don't come together. We all come meet a community. We all meet in the whole thing would have get. Hey, bo, I used to my sister picking the go. I get 5,000. I get 2,000. Me na Pama I get. Me na less I get. After we don't get on the whole it like how una to make party so no more. Una all together, una gladdy with you una self. Many people say feel proud say if people are gladdy because he don't deal with them.
Now what thing they can teach them when they go inside bush? Waiting in the
Now sing with the sing day.
We dey go sing there. Na culture. We dey go dance there. They plan out for dance. We dey sing. We dey go fishing. We dey go sometimes different then at all. We dey sing before them. Then they send chop for we. Then we dey left there. Then they cook for we. Na so we give them all. We feel like na you get them all. We dey panama.
Pleasure, that's no more pleasure.
Yes, I know the salad. Na the bush. Only the land.
You don't know for country map.
Then you don't, that's when they will tell you the one they know where they belong, the post where they belong to society. You get for respect them.
They bring friendship.
You know, the person all born at this particular village, but I don't know what I say. But they bring on all come, they can't put on a society like the last owner say on a carry put on all society. I let you go and they say as you see that it's friendly. Because they don't say this time if I me and two gender same thing. I me and two then have to bush. So that relationship go take again. And besides, if you now, because of culture, if you now go society, among the community, and get to take it funny. Because on top of them, they are saying, so this is not go society. Because on top of them, they talk, not all talk with the talk at all. Come on, that if you not go society, you're not part of the man there because inside the woman and the little.
Well, I just want you explain more. When you say if you not go society, you're not part of the man there.
Yeah.
Explain that a little bit more. What do you mean?
What I mean? Because if the woman there, because if you call it saying a woman, but you don't go society, and then that's important something for discourse among the women. Then they talk say we go now bush, bush, and you know good it because the man they're not a part of the society. So obviously now here the man they get for left at home. The one being a part of the society, then go and decide anything so far. So now one thing said and they decide something. If you did a part of them, he said we will use your own sense. Something decision making or imposition, something that a guy say, they for make you woman chief or they for make you this. But because you not go society, that you not to part and parcel of them. I let a guy they not with you and we'll talk to you and can you not go society. So that's I mean.
Oh, some people also like if you say a man and the first woman for this. So I want to talk small about that.
So man and the first man and you meet her. Everybody's supposed to be one.
They say we meet her, what do you mean?
Society business. So we don't need to say we don't love. So man and the first person to grow. Man for grow. Man for gain becoming a woman in Kono and going through initiation, as I said, is construed in terms of empowerment. It's believed that being a woman in this way, or becoming a woman in this way, and being associated with all things that belong to that category of woman, whether it's farming, rice, agriculture, rice farming, cooking, or even women's role in reproduction. All of these areas are believed to be dominated by women or female dominated, and it's believed that you don't just enter into this realm naturally. That you have to be trained. You have to be you have to earn it, and you earn it through the stages that you go through in Bono. So being a woman is something that is socially constructed. It's a cultural construct, and there's nothing natural about that. The only thing, when you're born, you're naturally androgynous. You have both sexes. When you go through initiation, then you enter the realm of culture, and you enter the women's world, and you're able to do all of these things. You're able to go to farms. You're able to do what women do. You're able to partake in women's ceremonies.
majority of Sierra Leonean women celebrate voodoo, campaigners on the ground are strongly opposed to the practice of female circumcision and wish to see it eradicated.
My name is Kappa. I am a medical doctor specializing in public health, maternal, child health, and family planning. And I am an activist on traditional practices affecting the health of women and the female child. My special pet is female genital mutilation, which I'm fighting for it to be eradicated. Not only in Sierra Leone, but wherever the practice is endemic.
Why is it that you're fighting for it to be eradicated?
Because that tradition is not good for the health of the women and for the health of the female children. The way it is practiced, the way it is done, and why is it done? We all ought to ask that question. It is not necessary for you to remove that part, the clitoris of a young girl. First of all, it's against people's human rights also, especially the young girls. They don't ask them, they just go and they just do this thing. They say it's culture and tradition. It's a very bad practice. It has a lot of health complications. As a doctor, that's why I'm fighting this. The first one is at the time this part of the body is cut, the women, the girls, or whoever, the victims, I call them, suffer the severe pain because it is done without local anesthetic. And the girls are held down by force, by this big fat women. They cut it and it's oppressive. Then there is bleeding, then there is infection, there is retention of urine, there is what we call septicemia, and at the end of it all, there is death. Some girls live and they die, and in the bush where this thing is done.
A lot of these are associated with male circumcision or any type of minor surgery. So, not to minimize those risks, but just to point out that there's a tendency to single out female circumcision as particularly horrifying, when in fact these are the same types of risks that are associated with any type of minor surgery where there's any type of invasion into the body or bleeding that takes place. In terms of the prevalence of these particular hazards, how often they actually occur, again, from 10 years of doing research, from participating in so many of these rituals during my time, during the time I spent in the field in the Gambia, talking to so many women, the actual incidence of death seems to be very, 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 very rare. Bleeding, certainly, I think they do get cases of girls bleeding. And, I've heard doctors say that they've had to see young girls who were bleeding profusely. But I've seen that in boy circumcision ceremonies as well on the field, that, there is bleeding in some cases. And then there are cases of death as well in boy ceremonies that are not really talked about. So when we talk about the immediate consequences of these operations, I think it's important to do so in the context of all these types of operations and not just single out female circumcision as particularly harmful.
The African women don't know what is wellness. You know what I mean by wellness? They don't know what it feels like to be well. They think that to have a baby, I know you have labor pains, okay? That's beside the point. But they think that for the rest of their lives, they should be having complaints or pains, and they believe that they are not supposed to enjoy sex. They think that sex is for reproduction of children, babies. So most of them that I have interviewed, said most of them don't even want sex because it's so painful.
For me, as for me, always are different. We see this woman with this they get as feeling or other thing. Me say as same as me, and they get me full feeling and anything I do well. I'm not say if I get it different day, we see this one feel maybe I feel past the way they feel so. Yes, you go like the same, you go, then one will go different day. But me, I don't feel like, I don't see any different. I don't see any people say different.
Because you know when they talk say differently, it's like the people they not the people when they talk anything, it's like they don't know the different now. Or you don't how you convince it differently. Now that's me one know. People like it's always talk say I don't wanna go, I don't get better feeling as I don't get as like way maybe when you make love to one, you know get the feeling like the way this way not go way get her, you get feeling. Yeah, as for me. Everything you can get, so if you see you get something, you don't go, and you will go. And they get all the same thing to me. Me say everything, and I'm the same way me say the thing. Now your opinion, me say my opinion.
It is the human right aspect of the child that UNICEF is concerned about. Even now in Freetown now, they are doing babies. When a baby is born, they go and take it to dance in the street. I have called them. I said, little children, what are you doing? They said, because when they grow up, they know. They don't know. When they grow up, they said they will refuse.
Most girls wanted to, want to go to Bondo. In fact, it's the ones that haven't gone, and it's past their time, so to speak, to go. But they're the ones who feel awful, and they're the ones who are kind of ostracized and made fun of by their peers. So they're the ones that suffer psychologically.
Me, I applied because reflects the old people's all Nigerian society. So during lunch break, they can talk for that. If I can go there to the stop so I can feel embarrassed getting in. So he said, at least I will make notes. He said, they don't tell me anything about society.
Give them a lecture on Bondo society, on this practice, FGM. And say, now you're listen, how many of you will want to go now and have it done? How many do you think will go?
Most girls want to go. Do they all know what's going to happen? They don't know. But then again, they have, just like I did, they have some idea. They know that it involves pain, and the pain is not an accident, it's deliberate. They know that, mysterious or secret things are going to take place, and they're going to be involved in that, and they're excited about that. They also know that they're going to be celebrated, they're going to be spoiled, they're going to have all kinds of foods, they're going to have presents, gifts, and they're going to be the center of attention. So, and then when they come out, they get to wear beautiful clothes, and their status changes. So they're aware of all that, and they want to go.
And me, I really like the culture. So I wanted to feel both. I don't know for the beginning because I get for ask that. We won't say they don't be that sweet because not be that age. Be too small. So you know we ask we say, at least they go put it back you want time, you don't want time. That's then I ask you say, they don't go put it back now. Well, we want days and now so we won't begin days the way they go for Gambia, generation where they go for Gambia. We don't know. Maybe they not go green, but I go wish again the begin, we go take me. You footstep, like where I go gliding for also. Instead of go gliding for you go decide for following your mind footstep.
Something where a bad way when they feel say then they go do bad thing. I think say that celebration not the come, not the evening dance, not the evening what they say. But any woman they glad for that day they say they begin they join tomorrow. Because you know say you begin say they become part of you.
Have one more I get that communication. Or say, well, these are something very powerful because secret. You know, they just talk as normal, secret.
Now,
yeah.
You said something don't do as well.
Yeah.
You know, for just tell people they don't.
No.
Yeah. You know, for 10%.
Yeah. But I know, like, where, the company in church water, sometimes, where I don't go big fight. So I make me say, I come back to my home. Let me say, get out understanding. Let me say no. So nobody not going to tell me.
What are they telling you? What are they telling you? Now the way they don't born in Uganda. They say home is home. No place like home. Smart, they go kind of Africa, not to so.
questions for me. A lot of the questions that you're asking me are questions that I have. And I ended up devoting my entire life and career and research interests to exploring these questions and these issues. So for me, no, it was a wonderful opportunity, and I don't regret it at all.
That's cute, huh? You enjoyed that, huh? It's kind of cute.
Okay. So there's a lot of material in this that I can't fully explicate. You probably have lots of questions about it. I do apologize for the lack of coordination between some of the speech and the images. This particular kind of cycle goes on for, I think in the case of the filmmaker, probably 3 weeks. This is not a one-day event. It's a huge initiation process of which the circumcision is kind of a culmination and a small part of a very elaborate ritual. I'd like to direct your attention to the handout for a moment. I realize we have a relatively little amount of time, so I want to talk about that and then come to a conclusion. Lots of claims get made about health consequences, effects on sexuality, and some of the more sensational claims are in those domains.